Hello and welcome. Today we will have a look at human relations and how they are mediums of spiritual infiltration by the enemy. Let's just start right at the beginning. In Genesis, we find in the Garden of Eden that animals could speak. The nature of things in the Garden of Eden was set up by God in such a way that the purity and innocence of it, the sovereignty and divinity of all creation and created things was such that there were not any limitations on animals, on humans. Like the only rule that God gave them in the Garden of Eden was that they should not eat of the fruit. And this gives us then a clear picture of how the enemy then came into play in the Garden of Eden. You see, the fallen angel, as well as the disembodied satanic or demonic beings on the earth, they need containers. They need a person or a thing that they can use and speak through to influence a human being or God's image. Okay, so in the beginning we find that Satan used the serpent because animals could speak at that time. But then as the story progresses to tell us, after the fall of temptation, and then God took away that ability from the snake, and over time, not only was it the ability of the snake, but just everything in God's original creation got dwarfed and twisted, and there were just a lot of changes which are far from God's original plan. So now that we are in 2025, and clearly there's not a single animal that can speak other than a parrot that will repeat things that they hear in their surrounding. But in this day and age, Satan is using human beings as containers or as bodies that he gets to capture, hijack or traffic, then operates through those people. I covered this in the series of narcissism, whereby I explained how Satan has used the foundational aspects of our lives, which are family or the church, to levy his spiritual attack on us and to levy all of his hatred and inner turmoil, to project it on to us. So I want you to have this solid understanding and the comparison of what happened in the Garden of Eden, that Satan used the reptile, which is a snake, to levy or impose his influence on Eve, right? And then nowadays, because animals have lost their ability to engage human beings verbally and communicate with human beings, so now Satan is using human beings on human beings. Okay, so this brings us to then the main topic for today, which is compromised human relations. The reason why we find in families as well as in the church, we see a lot of compromise there, because the enemy absolutely needs us to have access to each other and by virtue be able to influence each other. And we are not gonna have our guard up if it's a familiar face or a face that you trust, a family member or a church member. So let's just unpack this deeper. When we spoke about narcissism, it is important for me to make reference to narcissism because The whole idea of narcissism is control, okay? And one thing that narcissists do is they want to have access to their target, lifelong access, continual access. It's said that they cross boundaries, they do not listen, they don't back off when you tell them to back off, they don't take no. That's because the spirit, the operating spirit behind narcissism, behind this human to human phenomenon, which is called narcissistic personality, whatever, it is the blueprint of Satan. That is why it is so infringed on control. That's why it's all about having access, forced access in other instances, because we do know that narcissism not only operates within families whereby it's the children and parents dynamic, but they also love relationships, romantic relationships, marital relationships, and also it spills into work, church, civil environments, corporate environments. That goes to show that it's not just a phenomenon of human behavior. This is Satan's blueprint of influence, the same way that he used a reptile in the Garden of Eden to influence Eve. So now that animals have lost their ability to speak, he is now dependent on human to human contact for influence. Okay, so that is a very important mental note to keep during this podcast. So the reason why family relationships have to be compromised, parents have to have double standards, siblings need to gatekeep, be selfish, be manipulative, lying, undermining, church members to be conniving. The reason why there is so much compromise within the human community, it's because compromise is the perfect condition for Satan's influence to thrive. So what I did is I went and looked up the word compromise. I know what it means, but like the Holy Spirit led me to go and just, grab as much intel. So what I found is that to compromise is to make a deal between different parties where each party gives up, mark that word, gives up part of their demand. Wow, that's interesting. So let's stop right there. So if all of us are the human family, if all of us are God's children, made in God's image, we should have one demand, right? We should have one accord. We should have one spirit, one love. And this also just goes to show why there are so many denominations of churches, why there are so many versions of the Bible as well, because that compromising spirit or that compromising state allows Satan to infiltrate. It's the perfect loophole for Satan to infiltrate and cause confusion and bring about all manner and form of evil. So it says each party must give up part of their demand. So what are the demands of being a child of God? What are the demands of being God's image? Because all of us are God's image, right? So how come, especially those that are in the church, those who call themselves children of God, what would be our mutual demand if we say we are children of God? Well, we should have no business being narcissistic. That's number one. We should have no business being manipulative, looking down on each other, treating each other unfairly, lying to each other, manipulating each other, gatekeeping, just doing all these conniving things that are seen taking place within family dynamics as well as within church dynamics. The definition continues to say that in arguments, compromise means finding agreement through communication. Also, mark the word communication. So, the medium through which these agreements take place, it's through communication. Without communication, it becomes impossible for any agreement to take place. Okay, and then lastly, the definition says through a mutual acceptance of terms, which often involving variations from an original goal or desire. So this means that the mutual agreement or acceptance of terms is based on differences. So there's no unity in it. Although it is an agreement of some sort, but there's no unity. There are just certain variations that have to be abandoned. There are certain demands or goals and desires which are original to each individual, which then have to be set aside so that the communication can take place and so that the agreement can take place. So for now, I'm just gonna stop here. This was just an introduction to help explain and also to lay the foundation of human relations and how human relations are Satan's playground for spiritual abuse, spiritual hijacking, and the trafficking of destinies.